quite frankly, Barack's mom had him when she was 18 years old.
And married.
I don't know about that.
Open up the anti-Barack Obama conspiracy theory vault, and you never know what you'll find. That guy, for example, seems to be advancing a far less popular cousin of birtherism. It's not the crackpot theory that Barack Obama was born in Kenya or wherever. It's apparently a new crackpot theory that wherever Barack Obama was born, it was to an unwed mother. Totally untrue, of course. It says nothing about Barack Obama, but it does say a lot about the people who would be so extreme and weird as to say that stuff about Barack Obama. That clip you just heard was from 2008. Today, the blog Think Progress caught up with that 2008 Obama's mom wasn't married conspiracy theorist and asked him what he meant by that.
Videos emerged that, in 2008 of you saying that the president was born out of wedlock, that he's a bastard. Do you have any comment on that?
That's not an accurate portrayal. That's really a misrepresentation.
Not accurate. A misrepresentation. Roll tape.
Barack's mom had him when she was 18 years old.
And married.
I don't know about that.
So the woman on the left says Obama's mother was married. The guy on the right scoffs and says, I don't know about that. I'm not sure there's any misrepresentation here. Ask again.
You said that his mother wasn't married when he was born.
Groundswell of support, Scott.
You're not apologizing for that video?
Excuse me, no, I want to answer this question. I was asked whether the president's parents were married, and I said I didn't know. That was the extent of the question.
Wait. You were asked whether his parents were married? Because it didn't sound like that. It sounded like you were told that they were married by someone who was aware of the on-the-record facts that was true, and then you contradicted her. No need to just take my word for it. Let's roll the tape again and see who's right.
Barack's mom had him when she was 18 years old.
And married.
I don't know about that.
Ta-da! And now that man has a real chance at taking over the late Ted Kennedy's United States Senate seat. Massachusetts meets Scott Brown. He could be taking his claim that President Obama was secretly born to an unwed mother all the way to Washington, D.C. in your name as your senator. Mr. Brown is now a state senator. He's the Republican candidate in tomorrow's special election to fill that Senate seat that was held by Ted Kennedy for 47 years. Mr. Brown is running against Massachusetts Democratic Attorney General Martha Coakley. How did the Obama's mom secretly wasn't married guy come to be a viable candidate for Ted Kennedy's Senate seat? Well, back in November, Martha Coakley, the Democrat, was ahead by about 31 points in a Suffolk University poll. At the beginning of this month, a Rasmussen poll put Coakley's lead at 9 points. By January 7th, public policy polling was putting Scott Brown, the Obama's mom secretly wasn't married guy, ahead by 1 point. And as of this weekend, a Daily Kos Research 2000 poll had the race tied, while a Politico Insider Advantage poll had Brown leading by 9. And that is officially a trend in State Senator Scott Brown's favor. Many of the conservative activists and donors flooding into Massachusetts from out of state look at that trend and see this race as a referendum on President Obama, a referendum that President Obama is losing. Many Democrats, on the other hand, look at that trend and see the race less as a national referendum and more reflective of how Martha Coakley has pulled a bit of a Cree Deeds. Her campaigning has included gaffes like calling famed former Red Sox pitcher Curt Schilling a Yankees fan and misspelling the word Massachusetts in a campaign ad. Despite the spin and beltway breathlessness over this race, consider that there is still a real election to be fought here. The polls are mixed. Get out the vote efforts will likely mean everything. It is impossible to predict turnout in a special election like this one. It could be close enough that the weather could swing the election, or even the fact that voters had less time than usual to request absentee ballots because municipal offices were closed today for the Martin Luther King holiday. The Democratic Party definitely has better machinery in Massachusetts, so maybe that will help with get out the vote efforts. That said, this is the state that elected Mitt Romney, who succeeded Bill Weld. The current Democratic governor of the Bay State took office after 16 years of Republican governors. I understand all the election withdrawal hyperventilation over the prospects of an Obama conspiracy theorist red state Republican in blue Massachusetts, right? But there is still an election to be fought for here, and it's probably one that's going to depend on very old school things like phone banks and door knocking and driving people to the polls. Joining us now is Joan Vanacki, columnist for the Boston Globe. Ms. Vanacki, thanks very much for coming on the show tonight. It's nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
Tell me what you're expecting in terms of the get out the vote efforts and the overall turnout.
Well, the Democrats are going to do everything they can to pull out their vote. In that hope lies basically their hope for victory tomorrow, if there is such a hope right now.
You say if there is such a hope. Part of the reason this has so much attention on it nationwide is not only the implications for what happens if Scott Brown gets to the Senate, but because only about 12% of registered voters in Massachusetts are Republicans. How good is the Republican Party organization? Do they have the infrastructure on the ground for a good get-out-the-vote operation tomorrow?
Well, they don't have the infrastructure, but the other part of the Massachusetts election picture is that a little bit over 50% of the registered voters are unenrolled or independent voters. And when they get angry, when they get mad, they tend to vote Republican, and that's what Brown's counting on tomorrow.
The other way that this has been described in the national media, and I've been paying attention a lot to the home state media, I live in Western Mass, and to the national media and covering this, and I feel like the more national the source, the more likely it is that they describe this race as all about health care. It seems to be a more complex picture in terms of the Massachusetts media and the way it's being talked about in state. That's my impression. Do you share that?
Yes, I think it is more complicated than that. Yes, the polls show that people here in Massachusetts are not happy with the national health care legislation that Washington's grappling with, but President Obama is still really popular in Massachusetts. We've had a year of, our governor isn't very popular right now, for one thing. Deval Patrick's favorability rating is about 39%, and we've had a year of some, shall we say, little bit of corruption on Beacon Hill from ex-Speaker of the House and various state senators. And people have kind of focused on that, and I think they're channeling a lot of anger over what's gone on here locally. And Scott Brown has really successfully harnessed some of that anger.
It's interesting to think about the way this does connect to national political trends and feelings, I guess. I mean, to have Martha Coakley bring in Barack Obama so dramatically in terms of his rally last night at Northeastern, and then to have Scott Brown campaigning with a ton of Mitt Romney staff, but no visible evidence of Mitt Romney or really of any other national Republican figures other than a sort of vague association with the Tea Party movement and a visit from Rudy Giuliani. Is he running as an outsider, as somebody with no links to the establishment?
Right. I mean, that's part of, he's run a very smart campaign from that perspective. He says it's man against machine. He's running against the Democratic machine. Well, the Democratic machine is really the elected officials that the voters of Massachusetts have been returning to office year after year. As suddenly they're, waking up from their long sleep and realize that all their elected officials are Democrats. Well, they're the ones that sent them there. But the hard part for Martha Coakley is her only hope, really. Not going to say her only hope. President Obama, President Clinton, ex-President Clinton, still real popular here in Massachusetts. So she calls in the troops. They come. She's surrounded by the rest of the Democratic establishment, John Kerry, etc. That's great, except Scott Brown looks at that and says, hey, that's the machine I'm running against. So it's a little bit damned if you do, damned if you don't for her right now.
In terms of the Scott Brown success and what it says about the Republican Party and its prospects for maybe making inroads into the Northeast again, where it seems like they've almost been kicked out over the last few years in politics, I think about Massachusetts Republicans and I think about Mitt Romney running against Ted Kennedy, saying he'd be more pro-choice than Kennedy, more pro-gay than Kennedy would have been. Now Scott Brown is running for that seat with the endorsement of anti-abortion groups, campaigning explicitly on being in favor of waterboarding. Even though he voted for health reform in the state, he says he'll vote against it for the country. It sounds to me more like a Republican from the South of the Midwest than a traditional Massachusetts Republican.
Well, just like that first clip that you showed, he basically is kind of denying his more conservative leanings and has basically tried to sell himself as a much more moderate candidate. And that sounds a lot like Mitt Romney when he ran for governor in 2002 here. And a lot of the Romney people are behind the Brown campaign. It's kind of a reprise of what they did then. And Romney successfully beat a female candidate, Shannon O'Brien, who was the Democratic nominee. And they're using a lot of the same techniques and tactics. And it has been a smart campaign. Brown, painted the picture of who Martha Coakley is. And, in politics, that's death. If you don't paint the picture first and your opponent does, you know, you've got a lot to make up, and she did make some mistakes, and she just, I mean, you know, this was a guy that nobody knew much about, and I think she was complacent to some degree.
That gives her a real chance to define him had she taken it, and she didn't. Joan Vanocchi, columnist for the Boston Globe. It's great to have your insight on this race tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.